Thanks, Gemma. And we're incredibly excited to have Gemma leading our work here in South Australia. Can I begin by recognising we're meeting here on Kaurna land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I want to thank Robert Taylor for that welcome here this evening. I also want to acknowledge the many esteemed guests that we do have with us in the room. Of course, the Premier Peter Malinauskas, former Premier Mike Rann, Attorney General Kai Ma, and every single member of Parliament who is here with us. I'm not going to go through all of them, there's quite a few. I also wanted to state at the outset and thank the partners who have helped us get to this stage at the McKell Institute who are here in the room: Dale Beasley, Josh Peake, Bernadette Mulholland, Abby Spencer, and especially every single McKell Institute partner who's here tonight who have travelled from interstate. It's incredibly exciting to see you here in Adelaide. And I just want to say from the outset, 9 months or so since I took over this job as the national CEO, it's certainly a joy to be taking the McKell Roadshow here to Adelaide, my hometown. It's been a long time coming. Now, there's some of you in the room who are familiar with McKell Institute, with what we do, but I did want to briefly share our organisation's story before explaining why on earth we're here in South Australia. Now, in 2012, the McKell Institute was founded in Sydney. The idea was to build an institute, a research institute and a forum for ideas that wasn't beholden to any single benefactor or any single government. And that wasn't just focused on ideas aimed to provoke, but on identifying ideas and their pathways to implementation informed by a political awareness and made feasible through a willingness to build coalitions. Our institute takes its name from a wartime Labor Premier named William McKell. And it took that name in reference not to Bill McKell's flair or bombast, but to his approach to change making. He was a premier that was aspirational about the future, but to get things done, he straddled the old world binaries of labour and capital to win and hold power and build a legacy, taking the values of a poor kid from a broken home who built a career in the trade union movement all the way to the heart of modernising state government. But it does nevertheless remain a fair question: why are we, a Sydney-based organisation named after a former New South Wales Premier, setting up around the corner on Carrington Street? And the answer is, and I can especially say this because it's a sitting week in Canberra and none of our federal MPs or senators are in the room, but I can say this because genuinely much of the material difference that everyday people feel from good progressive policy occurs because of the decisions of state governments. Now, our institute will always have a voice on federal issues, but it's at the state level where I'm most ambitious about the impact that we can make. So in 2017, we launched our Victoria branch, the year after our Queensland branch. And tonight we launch in South Australia, from which we'll also be serving the Northern Territory, which is home to 250,000 people that are routinely ignored in our national public policy conversation. And in opening this branch, we're closer to being a truly national domestic public policy think tank, an organisation that's not stuck in any one city, that's not focused on just one level of government. We're building an organisation that works with trade unions, with business, with government, with civil society in every single Australian jurisdiction, that aspires to be informed not just by our partners and stakeholders, but by the lived experiences of everyday people too. And I see no better place in the country to nurture that ambition, to nurture that project than here in South Australia. And the reason is because of this. You know, a generation ago when I was growing up in this state, the state was on its knees. It was reeling in the long tail of a recession. But today, genuinely, it's the envy of the whole country. And I say that not lightly. I say it as someone who literally every second week is out of this state, travelling around the country, seeing in real time the attitudes of people towards South Australia change. And that evolution hasn't been an accident. It's occurred because our state often takes big swings and it imagines and implements bold ideas even when its back's against the wall. And I think this success is aided by South Australia's enviable and quite unique political culture, one that often rewards the big thinkers, where opponents, as the Premier noted on election night, are adversaries, but they're not enemies. And we're, of course, very thrilled to have the Premier here tonight. We did get an apology just a few moments ago from David Spears. He's obviously had a very big week, but it would have been good to see both of you in the same room. But genuinely, we operate in the spirit of bipartisanship, and that's certainly going to be the case here. Now, this political culture in Australia, in South Australia, this unique political culture, it encourages serious debate and it offers very little electoral reward for the voices consumed by the clutter in our national life, the imported grievances and the cultural crusades that are often cynically attributed to working people. And that comparably healthy political dialogue we have in this state is, I believe, a precondition to progress, and it's genuinely cross-partisan too. I know we've got Rob Sims here from the Greens, Connie Benares, I think, might be in the room. Serious policymakers from the crossbench that lift the tenor of our debate. And I want to thank you for being here and thank you for your approach to politics. So it's clear that our state has momentum, but it's also clear that we can't take that for granted. Too often, it's been vulnerable to decisions that are made beyond our borders. In late 2013, famously, when General Motors accepted Joe Hockey's invitation to leave our state, thousands of South Australian families were imperilled immediately. In that moment, my new colleague, Gemma, who you heard from earlier, recognised the significance. And she'd soon connected with 30 workers whose lives were thrown into chaos because of the Holden closure. And for 3 years, she tracked their post-closure lives, which informed her PhD on industrial transition, a project that recognised the costs South Australians can pay when they fall victim to decisions made in distant boardrooms or cabinet rooms, but when they have very little to fall back on. So Gemma's doctorate was informed by the lived experience of people in South Australia. And it's her ability to incorporate those stories of everyday people into robust policy research that produces practical policy solutions. It gives me every confidence that Gemma's going to ensure that this branch thrives, and where everyone in the organisation is thrilled to be working with her. So obviously our shared history proves that South Australia can be a place where big things can happen. But realising that problem, of course, isn't just a job for government. And while we at McKell certainly believe in the power of government, we also know that governments aren't omniscient. They can't see every challenge, they can't predict every opportunity, and sometimes they need help, sometimes they need a nudge from good faith actors. And in front of me, I see a room full of those types of good faith actors. Heads of trade unions, heads of industry groups, representatives of South Australia's leading companies, non-for-profit leaders. And that to me is a very natural McKell Institute coalition, and we're eager to work with every single one of you in the years ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured tonight to introduce a leader who embodies the approach to policy making I've just outlined. The Premier clearly has an ambition for this state, and he pursues a brand of progressive politics focused more on outcomes than on posturing. The Malinauskas government also recognises that good policy making comes not just from their own ideas, but from the expertise and the experiences of our entire community. Now, when Peter Malinauskas assumed the Labor leadership in 2018, his approach to policy making became, I think, immediately clear. He could have taken an easy two-term small target strategy. Instead, even through the maelstrom and the difficulty of COVID, the Premier and the Labor team crafted a big target agenda for the future. And it meant that on election day, South Australians had an actual choice. They had ideas on the ballot like universal early childhood education, an Indigenous voice to state parliament, expansion to social housing, a future-facing hydrogen job strategy. Big, evidence-based, challenging propositions. And the Premier's success at the election and since lay not in his ability just to communicate that vision, but in the substance of what he was communicating. A manifesto for a fairer, more economically complex, more aspirational South Australia. And that's a model that the McKell Institute admires, that the South Australian public clearly demand, and which serves as a refreshing template for the rest of the country. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, to officially launch the McKell Institute South Australia Northern Territory, it's my pleasure to welcome the 47th Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Peter Malinauskas.